don't know the exact name of the process in Parliament where individuals go up to the stage and then they're asked questions by other members of Parliament. And I think through that process you sort of get, you know, I guess in our media, we do the same thing here. You're creating sound bites, you're creating dialogue, you're getting things, you're forced to be, I guess, accountable for things that you say in the media, and then have people in broad media structures understand that and understand your opinion. I think that brings about a lot more transparency in their environment discussing political commentary. And I don't think we have that transparency in the United States in political forums where people coming from the opposing parties are often shouted down. There was instances, I think, back 07 where a young man wasn't allowed to come into a Bush forum because of the shirt he was wearing. How can we bring about transparency in America to, you know, have access to political people and sort of encourage that dialogue? So right now I don't think we have it, and we definitely don't have it in our media.
That's a good question too. I mean, I don't know if I can give an all-encompassing answer, but I think what we first need to understand is we've got to pressure our political leaders, whether that's calling them or going to their offices. I don't know why this doesn't happen more often on the left, just going to people's offices in Congress and complaining about the nature of the dialogue. You can complain to journalists about this. Why are you reporting so much on death panels? It's completely fictitious and made up. There's no reason to be talking about these things to the extent that people are talking about it, and you're creating this lack of transparency because you have these debates that are about nothing. It's all about spin. It's not about any sort of substance. We need to demand, and you know, be talking to mass media journalists and political leaders, and ask them to you know, move beyond this kind of spin system. Basically, we just have to have people who won't put up with this kind of garbage. You have to have people who are well informed to do that, and they recognize garbage coverage when they see it. So there's no magic bullet or magic answer, but definitely it requires getting in people's faces and making them feel uncomfortable. We're pushing this information.
There was a radio raconteur out of the past named Gene Shepard, and Gene Shepard used to say frequently, television is watching other people do things. I don't want to watch other people do things. I want to do things. And here that's somewhat true today, I think, but we've got two radio outlets that I wish more people would listen to. One of them is NPR, and the other one is Air America Radio. I think it's still called Air America Radio, isn't it? It's available here in this area.
It's off the air.
It's available here on 8:20 a.m. I think.
Right.
8:20 a.m. and there's several FM frequencies that it's on too. But certainly, it's more balanced with NPR and those stations. Not that all the Air America people are good, but most of them are.
I used to listen to Tom Hartman a lot when I would do. I used to listen to Tom Hartman a lot when I would do long commutes to my job in Central Illinois, before I was thrown out of that by budget cuts. But yeah, I think you know, this idea of you don't want to watch people do things, you want to do things. This is actually a really important point that this really famous political scientist Robert Putnam talks about. He's actually shown empirically. People who watch a lot of television don't seem to have a lot of time for anything else. They don't be involved in any sort of civic organization. They're very alienated, and they're also very fearful of the rest of the world. They think they're way more likely to overestimate the amount of violence in their communities and be more fearful of walking around at night in their communities. And, I mean, there are very clearly toxic effects. I'm not saying that you shouldn't watch television if you want to watch television, but I mean, there is a relationship there of an inverse relationship. The more you consume, the lower the civic capacity goes. It's very well understood. So we do need other kinds of participation. I think that's a great point.
Thanks. A couple of things. One is the traditional media, broadcast, maybe even cable, print certainly, they feel threatened by online mediums even though they have online presence. So the whole media landscape is changing. So could you put that into context, what that might mean? And also you mentioned you work with young people, so any observations beyond apathy, like, you know, about young people and the future, given that, you know, there's a baby boomlet, and there's a fairly large population now that's not represented in forums like this. So what happens to them and their consciousness?
I think in terms of young people, the thing I always try to impress upon my students is, we do have this national debt thing going on, and there's been it's been inflated in a lot of ways in terms of the alleged danger, but, when it comes to things you don't like war, let's say, you're going to be paying for those things for the rest of your life. So you better pay attention. It's your tax money. Do you want it to go towards keeping teachers in Illinois in their jobs, or do you want it to go to blowing things up? That's what happens. So, I think that's an important point. You've got to appeal to people's material interests, because that's always something that gets to people. Could you repeat the first point again real quick?
The point, the media landscape is sort of fragmenting, and online is...
I would recommend taking a look at Robert McChesney and John Nichols' new book, The Death and Life of American News or American Journalism. It's a really good book. What they basically show is that you have this really big decline in terms of traditional news audiences, people going online. And the real fatal flaw a lot of these news outlets made is that they gave their content away for free. But even if they didn't do that, the advertising doesn't translate the same way on online advertising as it does in print. So they're in big trouble. I think that's a good thing, that they're in big trouble. Because when you look at years past, it wasn't necessarily a fabulous thing that you had all this private ownership and no public media. I think we should have public media in this country where people, citizens groups and activists can get involved and be participatory, and it doesn't have to all be about profit. But it's a good thing in the sense that a lot of these conglomerates are going to go the way of the dodo bird eventually if these trends keep up. Whereas you might have a lot of content with a far lower level of profitability with individually owned newspapers. Now these mega corporations have to make much more. Demand a much higher profit margin. They're not meeting those margins as much as they were. McChesney and Nichols, I had to say I didn't agree at first before I read the book, but they make a pretty compelling case that there's a lot of real crisis going on in terms of the decline of audiences and advertising dollars. So I think there's a lot of opportunities here, and it's probably a good thing that these outlets are going to be in big trouble. We just have to make sure that they don't go the route of the banks. They just get bailed out every time they're in trouble. Because then we're going to be left with the same stuff, but we're just paying for them to make us ignorant. We're already doing that. We don't need to do it 2 times over. You don't think there's any danger?
They're not a keystone of the economy.
But there is a certain informational requirement of elites in this country when you talk about the New York Times audience. I mean, they have to become informed. So it may not be that all of these elite outlets that are there now are necessarily going to be there, but they're going to demand some sort of elite media. And I mean, I see this being a big problem for a lot of regional chains and information. I don't think the New York Times or these kind of elite agenda-setting outlets are necessarily going to go anywhere.
They're going to go the route of the Washington Post, where they're fed by some very profitable corporation.
Yeah, I mean, but take a look at that book. I mean, we could talk about it even longer. I don't know how much time we have left.
We have about 15 minutes.
We do have 15 minutes.
Can I ask a question from here? Would you give your analysis of Olbermann, Keith Olbermann, and Rachel Maddow?
Okay. Yeah. Great. I mean, I guess it's like when I look at the Democratic health care reform, I think it's nice that they passed Medicaid extension rather than nothing. Something was better than what the Republicans were offering, which was nothing. I kind of view Olbermann and Maddow in the same way. I mean, the nice thing about Rachel Maddow is she's not like a complete fearmonger who just screams all day long like Glenn Beck and Rush Limbaugh do and so on and so forth. But at the same time, they kind of serve as these gatekeepers on the
When I hear
left.
Olbermann, I hear left-wing positions. Do you disagree?
I don't follow him a lot, but from what I have seen, he does seem to be the most open to progressive views amongst the people on MSNBC. A lot of what he's done that I have seen, when you talk about criticizing the Afghanistan war, my impression was it was primarily a lot of pragmatics. He said that this war was not a winnable war, and it was a waste of money and resources, and all that's fine. I don't have any problem with those kinds of views being expressed. My problem is, where is the other part of the left spectrum where people want to talk about imperialism? And they can talk about it every day if they want to talk about it, and not worry about being thrown out of a mass media outlet. So I have a problem more in general with MSNBC as an entity than I do with any individual there, that as an outlet, A lot of times they just seem to be responding to what's going on at Fox News. They're playing the second fiddle, and they got to correct all this misinformation about death panels and other garbage. At the end of the day, they're left talking about death panels.
Reactive instead of proactive.
Right, it's reactive, it's not proactive, and it's also missing out on this whole other part of the spectrum, which could be the discussion. So I think that that needs to be a part of this, and we're not getting that with MSNBC a lot of the time. It's certainly improved, cable news has certainly improved in terms of views because of them being there, but I think it's got a long way to go.
I want to say something about that. I was listening to Ed Schultz's radio program just this week, I forget, Wednesday or so. Schultz claims that in the evening MSNBC has blown CNN out of the water, and he also thinks they're in stalking distance of getting after Fox, at least at his hour. Now Schultz has got, I mean, I have some problems with him, but he's been beating the drum on the healthcare and stuff. So I'm thinking that from what I'm hearing and listening to these, it might be a little more elaborate than that. That there's, I mean, at least you've got people like Schultz, like Stephanie Miller, who you know goes after the right wing. There's some more interesting things. No, they're not leftists. They're not anti-imperialists, but although Schultz calls himself a lefty, I mean, and he's, you know, progressive. So I think there's some interesting stuff there that needs to be looked at. I don't think it's quite open and shut.
The one thing I didn't like, I mean, if we're going to talk about Ed Schultz, is that there's this idea on the left, and Olbermann's kind of victim to this too. He's a victim of his own success, that they're trying to outfox Fox in terms of the polemicism and the nasty comments and vitriol. I hear people like Ed Schultz, and they're saying, we'll be right back, taking it to these conservative thugs. And I don't want to see people on the left go that route of, you don't like people, so you just call them names. I mean, sometimes, you know, derogatory names are relevant, but it's not in place of reasons analysis. And that's one of the things that people have to worry about when you talk about going after ratings. Now, I don't know how successful they've been, because MSNBC, the last time I looked, nationally, they only had something like 500,000 daily viewers, compared to CNN, which was more than that. I think it was closer to 1 million. And Fox was closer to like 1.5 to 2. So they're trying to outfox Fox at their own game, and I personally think a lot of people on the left don't want to hear that stuff. I don't think that they want it all to be about just name calling and, you know, you're a thug and an idiot. And, sometimes it's called for when you get really angry, but it shouldn't be like the staple of your dialogue.
I think the Huffington Post started out rather well, but lately they have become more or less gossip.
They do original reporting too, and that's another thing that Robert McChesney talks about in his book, and that's part of the problem when he talks about the idea that you're going to have this internet alternative of grassroots kind of left-leaning journalism that's going to replace corporate news. And it's just probably not going to happen, because these people have shoestring budgets. They're relying on grant money. They do important things, but they're not a substitute for sustained reporting with real institutions that don't have to worry about whether they're going to exist tomorrow. So it is very important. I've looked at Huffington Post many times, and they do have some pretty original, interesting reporting, especially about the Gulf oil issue. They had a lot of good stuff, but we do need a lot more.
You mean they're not on the payroll of BP yet?
Well, it didn't look like it from the stuff I saw, which was good.
So if there are no further questions, thank you, Anthony DiMaggio, very much.